Story 1. I taught at a really rural school, but this was too much. I had a student who said that his goat ate his notebook and his homework. Seemed like a reasonable thing to happen, as goats will eat anything. His mom was a teacher at the middle school, who came over all the time. I talked to her and just busted out laughing, saying they didn't have a goat and that was the best excuse he has ever come up with. If I ever have children, I am going to get a goat. So if it ever eats my child's homework and the teacher calls us in to explain the obviously crazy lie my child told, my wife can then slam her fist on the table and say, I knew getting that goat was a bad idea. Story 2. I used to teach in a school for the super rich. Many kids came to school in $100,000 plus cars or SUVs. Also, it was in Southeast Asia. A few years ago, we were having a huge problem with a kid showing up late for school. Not really late, but 5 or 6 minutes late. Late enough that he was getting detentions every day, which turned into suspensions and the like. So one day, I confront him when everyone else leaves, and he acts like he's deciding to come clean. Mr. Trekkie, he says, it's really my dad's fault. I'm always late because he won't let us take the Ferrari anymore to school. Our new Range Rover is so much slower, and that's why I'm always late. Then I ask him how his Ferrari was transporting him, his sister, and neighbor, and who was driving. He told me his driver was driving. Then I asked him how 4 people could fit in a Ferrari, because the Ferrari he said he owned was a two-seater. He stared down at the ground and said, I just don't get up on time. Story 3. I don't know if this is the worst or best. My students had a few week-long project, at the end of which they had to give a presentation. One of my students didn't show up for class and missed giving his presentation. He attended the following class, and at the end of class came up to talk and gave me the following explanation while red-faced and staring at the ground. He and his girlfriend were getting ready for class at his apartment, and they were feeling a little frisky while showering. They proceeded to do the deed in the bathroom, and while they were going at it against the bathroom door, the door handle broke off. They couldn't get out of the bathroom, and he eventually had to wrap a towel around himself and climb out of the second-story window, get down to the ground, go back into his building, enter his apartment, and break down the bathroom door from the outside. He apologized profusely and was quite embarrassed. I never had to try so hard not to laugh in my life. I let him give his presentation the following class. Story 4. Surprisingly, I haven't had any crazy excuses yet. Most kids just say don't have it or didn't do it nonchalantly. The apathy. But there is one time when I lost their assignment and had to explain. I was grading one-page writing assignments over spring break. I had gone somewhere a few hours away. Honestly, I don't even remember where. I think it was some sort of beach. On the way home, the windows of my car were open, and the folder with their papers was on the back seat. Needless to say, the folder opened and quite a few papers just flew out the window and into God knows where. For any of the grades I didn't remember, I just met with the students so they could remind me what they wrote. It wasn't a big grade, so it wasn't a huge deal. But it was pretty funny. Story 5. Macroeconomics teaching assistant here. My students have to deliver weekly problem sets. One of the worst excuses ever? I thought Max, other student, was going to make and deliver mine. The problem sets are individual. The stupidest comeback? Can't I just photocopy the next one and deliver it twice? The funniest? My mom said I needed to party more, so I went to the club. The club part is true. I saw him there. I told him that excuse was not good enough. 3 weeks later, found him in the same club. He approaches me and says he brought the problem set. 10 minutes later, he's in a table doing that week's problem set. Story 6. I had a basketball game after school, and when I got home, my parents made me cut the grass until midnight. Then, my sister got sick and we had to take her to the ER. Similar thing happened to my friend Nick. Background. We live in NYC, and his dad came into a bit of money. They bought an old house on land that was easily worth 10 to 12 million on its own, for just over $1 million on the condition that it would remain a private house and not become a building development like most of the other plots had. 2 problems. His dad had spent all the money he had come into on the purchase because he didn't think the renovation work would be that bad. And 2, he had decided to do the renovations himself, despite not being handy or having no contracting experience. Having 3 children, the oldest of which was Nick, who was 14 at the time, he decided he would enlist them as subcontractors. Well, for about 6 months, Nick would randomly be missing half his homework. For some reason, he decided that, even though he knew it wasn't there, he would search his backpack for it when the teacher asked where his homework was. Mr. Aniano finally caught on to the stupid charade and would give him a hard time. Yeah, search for it. I'm 100% sure it's there, Nicky. Maybe if you wish hard enough, it'll show up. All dripping with sarcasm. Finally, Nick got fed up one day and yelled back, I was sanding floors until 3 in the morning. It was true. Mr. A laughed and called him the worst liar ever. Story 7. One of my first graders was a bit of a liar, just like her mom. Every time they were running late, there was a wreck or a flat tire, or they ran out of gas. One day, she said she didn't have her homework, a simple paper where they looked for shapes around their homes. She said her pet ferret took it out of her bag, dug a hole in the wall, carried it to the basement, put it in the washing machine, stole the keys to her mom's car, and ran away. So that's why she was late and had no homework. I asked her sister about it. She said they didn't have a ferret or a basement. Story 8. At my first gig, I was teaching a computer literacy class with 6th to 8th graders. The 7th graders outnumbered the rest. Nearly every day, the students would try to get me off topic by talking about MySpace and determining how they could find my MySpace account. They didn't believe that I never made one for myself. Anyway, one day after everyone got into a pissing contest over who had the most friends, I gave them a homework assignment. It seemed that the people with the most friends on MySpace had no access to a computer to complete the assignment. I was fairly annoyed with a lot of them. Story 9. I worked in a state where they do a lottery, so the kids that went to our school didn't necessarily live right around the corner. Some of them were there because they had been kicked out of all the other closer schools and now had to come to ours. Yeah, I worked in a winter. One girl was habitually late to my class. Every single day. I collect homework at the beginning of the class to make sure that they don't, do their homework when they're supposed to be doing other things. This day she shows up late, again. She was on contract that said that if she was late, she'd be spending her Saturday in Saturday school. She blazes into the classroom about 15 minutes after the bell, freaking out. There's a dead homeless guy in my car. That's why I wasn't on time to turn in my homework. I, of course, really hoped she didn't have a dead homeless man in her car, so we took a class field trip out to her car. Yep, dead guy. She drove 20 minutes to school with him in her car. I let her turn in her homework. Story 10. He wanted to turn in his assignments after his final, and we would no longer be meeting as a class. I said, well, I need it before the summer starts because I'm leaving on a trip the day after and will have all my grades turned in before I go. The next August, I am in a before school starts meeting. He comes walking in. It was an open cafeteria area. Doesn't let the speaker pause and says, here you go. I was confused, partly because I couldn't remember who he was, and partly because I was focused on the speaker, and partly because I was embarrassed for interrupting the meeting. I asked what the stack of papers was. He said, the work you wanted. I flashed on the previous June's conversation and asked, you mean the work I wanted before the summer started? He replied, oh, I thought you wanted it before the summer ended. We just looked at each other for a while. Some giggles rippled around the tables near me. I took the papers. He gave a big, double-browed eye roll like I'm slow and don't get it. I guess it wasn't necessarily an excuse, just a lack of communication. I graded the assignments. He attempted 3 of the 10. He finished 2 of the 3. About half of his answers were incorrect. It raised his grade from a 48% to a 50%. Still an F. Story 11. Not a teacher, but when I attended private school for a year, there was a kid who would be signed out of class early to go deer hunting. He'd end up missing the homework being assigned, but counted present. Eventually, deer season ended, and he had to do his homework for once. The first assignment he had to do was maybe 3 math worksheets, front and back. Say 60 math problems, all easy and multiple choice. The next day, he turns in one sheet, just the front done, and says that was all he could do because he was constipated all night. The teacher said, "You know, I've heard some bad excuses, but at least you're telling me now that you're full of it." When I asked him later about it, he confused diarrhea with constipation and thought it was a good excuse. Story 12. Not a teacher, but I had an issue with an English paper once. We had to choose an author and get the choice approved by our teacher, and then use books from the school library, and only the school library, to write a report on them. I had chosen Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I had previously borrowed the books and knew we had 3 of them: Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, and Mostly Harmless. We had 6 weeks for the project. Second day, I go to the library to check the books out, and they're already checked out. All of them. I wait a few days and go back. Still checked out. I ask the librarian. They had been checked out weeks ago and never brought back. I go and talk to my teacher, asking if I can change the author I picked. He wouldn't let me. I explained the books that the library was supposed to have had been checked out weeks ago and were overdue according to the librarian. His response was that I should have thought about that before picking that author. Seriously? I ended up failing English that year. The report was something like 60% of our grade overall. And this is after my parents came in and had several discussions with the principal about this. I ended up acing English in summer school, though. That guy was a mega douche. Story 12. Online class. Student didn't log into the course for the first 2 weeks of a 6-week class. She emails to say sorry, that she's been busy planning her wedding, and can she turn in work late. Also, her wedding is that weekend and she's going on her honeymoon after. So, of course, she can't do the work then. So, can she just do the work when she gets back? I laughed and emailed back a huge no. I was getting married that summer too, yet I managed to plan, grade, and respond to student emails at the same time as getting married. Second best, student emailed me after the due date to ask for an extension. She and her boyfriend got in a fight and took off with her spare keys. She had locked her own keys in her car, and her laptop was in the car. She couldn't email me sooner because she had lost her phone. No explanation for why she couldn't just use another computer. Third best, student turned in work late and then emailed me a 3 to 4 page explanation for why it was late. The condensed version was that he had taken caffeine pills to stay up late all night to complete the paper, but then had fallen asleep in the library in the middle of the night, and when he woke up, he kind of started hallucinating about whether or not the paper was finished. Story 12. A friend of mine who's a teacher had a student that was notorious for not completing and turning in his assignments. A parent-teacher conference was scheduled and seemed to do the trick. He was completing his homework and turning it in on time. A couple of months later, he comes into class unprepared. My friend asked for his homework, and he didn't have it because the FBI took it away. The reason was true. His father had been taken into custody and a warrant was served. The student's homework was taken as possible evidence. Story 13. That they were flying home over the weekend, and when they put their bag in the overhead bin, they found some white powder loose in there. They told the airline, who cleaned it up, but since it was clearly weaponized anthrax, they were too anxious about their pending death to finish their homework. When they told me this, I gave them the no-penalty extension they asked for, and in return, after they didn't die, they gave me a low teaching evaluation with the comment, "Doesn't care about students." Story 14. I had a teacher not accept my homework because she thought my excuse was bullcrap. I live on a farm, and when I was going to class one day, some of my cattle broke through the fence, and I had to stop and get them back in and mend the fence. I was only about 15 minutes late for class, and the assignment was due at the beginning of the class. I also had another teacher fail me on a homework assignment because I asked her to leave early because I had a spider bite that was definitely infected, and the skin was pulling away from the bite. Sometimes, excuses that are so far-fetched are actually true. Story 15. Obligatory not a teacher, but in college I had this terrible nutrition class that I had to take for my general degree. I was finishing up my worksheet before class when my roommate came home after going to Margarita Happy Hour, 12 to 3 p.m. in my college town. He asked what I was doing, and I told him about my stupid worksheet for my stupid class. And he joked about feeding it to my dog and saying my dog ate my homework. So I took my dog out really quick before I left for class. And when I came back, this mother trucker was chewing on my homework. He was drunk and had made it through about half of the sheet because he thought it would be funny. I didn't even try to explain that one. I just skipped class. Story 16. A student comes in and says he couldn't turn in his homework. I asked him why he couldn't, and he says the dog ate it. He had said before he didn't have a dog, so I ask him why he couldn't turn it in for real. His eyes fill up with tears, he looks down sadly, and quietly says, "Let's dispel once and for all with this fiction that Barack Obama doesn't know what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing. Barack Obama is undertaking a systematic effort to change this country, to make America more like the rest of the world." Story 17. My girlfriend is a teacher. She got so sick of students not handing in assignments on time that she came up with a system wherein to hand in a late assignment, the student had to fill out a sheet explaining why the assignment was late, and then have their parent or guardian sign off on it. If they didn't fill out and turn in the form, they get an incomplete on the assignment. Not allowed to fail kids anymore. It's always entertaining at the end of the year when the student has to explain to their parents and the administration why they have an incomplete in the class. Story 18. My house burned down. Now, I wouldn't think that a kid whose house burned down the night before would be at school on time the next day, in his clothes and not something from the Red Cross or whatever, and not looking like he had been through a night of hell. So I called Mom, knowing it was a bullcrap story. "Mrs. So-and-so, I'm so sorry to hear about your house. Is there anything I can do?" "Excuse me?" "The house fire. Michael told me the place was gutted, which is why he couldn't turn in his science fair project. Incidentally, they had 4 months to do this project. Everything is fine. We had a minor kitchen fire and a little bit of smoke damage, but it's all okay. Michael will have his project in tomorrow." The next day, I get this disaster of a project backboard. Nothing was in the right place. Only one of the 12 items was typed, and that was a 2-page Wikipedia article he had just printed out. The rest was handwritten by what looked like a monkey with Down syndrome. It was a mess. He finally admitted that it was his 6th grade project which he had kept, and not the one he was supposed to do for the 8th grade. A few months later, this same kid literally painted the walls of one of the bathrooms with his own crap. And I'm talking from the floor to as high as he could reach, everywhere. That was the year I seriously started to think I should be teaching younger and slightly less messed up students. F that kid. Story 19. I teach English in a non-English speaking country. I had a kid tell me him and his sisters didn't have their homework because they were sick Monday, the day it was assigned. Fair enough, that's why I didn't ask you for it. He went on to insist that they wouldn't be able to do what I was assigning today because they were going to be sick again on Friday. Turns out they were planning on skipping Friday and wanted me to think they were sick, so he told me ahead of time. The kid is not too bright. Story 20. Not a reason for late homework, but I was a substitute teacher with a Year 3 class and was left instructions to ask if anyone has their homework completed, and a kid said, "F you and your effing homework. You didn't set it anyway, you white cow." Then when I sent the kid to the principal, he stormed out and said he was going to get his cousins and come back to bash me. One kid in Year 1 told me about how his friend was in the hospital, so he hadn't finished. His imaginary friend that he'd already told me about.